All right, if you are hearing this, we are going to get started in about 5 minutes here. Once Steve connects, I'm just getting everything set up in the back end. So thanks for your patience. We'll start the live stream in about 5 minutes. For those of you who are just joining us, we are just waiting a couple more minutes to get started here. We are doing a live stream with Steve Kaufman in just a minute to go over his progress towards learning Arabic. So we will get started in about 3 minutes or about 2 minutes now, and we will be taking live questions once Steve is done with his presentation. So sit tight with us. All righty. We've got Steve Kaufman joining us. Steve, can you hear me? Looks like he's still getting connected. There you are. All right, and I'm opening it up to let users in. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks.
Good.
Excited to be here.
All right.
So just to give everyone a quick introduction, I'm Shelby Smith, head of user onboarding here at Link, and I'm joined by the iconic Steve Kaufman. We are all doing a 90-day challenge with Link that started on September 1st, but it's not too late for anyone who hasn't joined a challenge yet. And these challenges are meant to keep us engaged with our language learning goals. Language learning can be a difficult road sometimes, so we want to have these events to be able to bring the community together, get you guys to interact with one another, as well as be able to learn from the master himself. Steve is currently learning his 20th language, which is Arabic, around there, maybe 21st.
Yeah.
And he is going to be giving us a presentation today, a short, 5-10 minute presentation on his tactics with achieving his goals in Arabic. And we will also do a Q&A after that. So I've got some questions that were submitted in advance. We'll start with those. And then we will be taking questions from those of you who are on this Zoom call today. So feel free to use the chat for people who are here on the Zoom call. You can use this to be submitting questions and interacting with one another. I'll also be sharing some links with you guys in the chat. And so just on that note too, if you guys do want to ask a question, just make sure to use the chat today, since this is a live stream on Steve's channel. And so I'll drop a link here in a second for those of you who need to get a link to join a link challenge.
Shelby, if I can interrupt, something very strange has happened to my screen. I'm now looking at someone else's desktop.
Oh.
Claudia, Ausschreibung. Huh?
Claudia, it looks like you're sharing your screen. I will take care of this here.
I'm being hacked by Claudia. Schriften. There we go.
There we go. All right. Sorry about that, Steve.
Oh, and now I'm looking the wrong way there. So there we go.
There you are. This is our first time using this streaming service for anyone curious. So here we go. So with that being said, Steve, would you please share with us a little bit on, your tactics or how you are getting from where you're at to where you want to go?
Right. Okay. So a couple of comments here. First of all, it's very interesting watching Shelby. By the way, we're very happy to have Shelby as part of our team. She's going to help make Link easier for people to understand and make them enjoy using it more. And I noticed that, Shelby, you, like me, you tend to swing back and forth on your chair. That's good. Sometimes I used to sit on one of these Swiss medicine balls, so then I would be jumping up and down the whole time. So all this stuff can happen. We're allowed to do what we want. Now I lost you somehow.
Oh, we're here. We're here.
Okay. All right. So, I think I'm going to go over sort of what I do. I just saw a question pop up, what about Hindi? I want to learn Hindi. With all these other languages, we won't be adding any languages until we finish the rewrite. All right, unmute. So again, we won't be adding languages until we finish the version 5.0 of Link, which, by the way, I have been using in beta form. I'm not allowed to show it to you, but I enjoy it very much. Enough said. I will show you the older version, which is what everyone else has access to. So with regard to Hindi, we actually, I gather, have people writing the mini stories in Hindi. We also have that in Urdu. We have that actually in quite a number of languages. And once we have the rewrite done, then those languages will be introduced at Link. So please be patient. We want to kind of stay on one task at a time. The purpose of these is to show you how Link can help you stay motivated, how the 90-day challenge can help you stay motivated. And I'm going to begin then. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Hopefully that works. Share, no, share content, share screen. Okay, and Zoom, yeah, start broadcast. Hopefully this is all going to work. Everything's a bit of a mystery to me. So you are sharing your screen, except I don't, so maybe I got to get out of that. And can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so then I will go to link here. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so my Arabic, I sort of bounce back and forth between the mini stories, and I'm even doing the mini stories in Egyptian Arabic, which is easy because I've already gone through the mini stories in other languages and in standard Arabic. And I'm doing the Egyptian Arabic because occasionally there are Egyptian movies on Netflix and I want to be able to understand a bit more. Because I come across a lot of words in Egyptian Arabic that are very similar to standard Arabic, it probably distorts my numbers. I give myself credit for more, words learned than I should, because in fact, I'm learning words that I kind of more or less already know. So I bounce back and forth, spending maybe 10, 20% of my time on many stories, either Egyptian Arabic or standard Arabic, just to kind of get the flow of the language. And then I go for more difficult stuff. And I have put them in this course here, which I call Happy Scribe, because I use an automatic transcription service called Happy Scribe. And so what happens is my Al Jazeera podcasts, I used to have this person in Morocco transcribe them for me. I'm not allowed to share them in the library because we can't get any answer from Al Jazeera as to whether we can share them. But it ends up being expensive. And 2-3 years ago, I used an automatic transcription service, or 2 years ago, and it wasn't very good. And for someone learning the language, when, whereas it's supposed to say, I don't know, independence, and it says tomato, that kind of throws you off the track. So I stopped using it and I went back to paying this person to transcribe. But now the automatic transcription service is very good. I compared some of the manually transcribed versions with the automatically transcribed, and they were like 99% the same. So now I pay $10 a month for, I don't know, 12 hours. And so now, because I have trouble actually grabbing the MP3 files from the Al Jazeera podcast site, they make it difficult for some reason. But the same lady in Morocco is very skilled at doing this. So she sends me every week 3 or 4 MP3 files that she's extracted somehow. And then I put them onto Happy Scribe. And then I start studying them. And this is more difficult content. Before I go through one of these, lessons, let's have a look at my statistics. So this last week, I acquired 660 known words. I ignore my automatically generated goals. I just know that I would like to do about 100 new known words every day with some slippage. So if it's 500 a week, that'll be good, because I want to increase my known words total. My known words total now is 15,794. Bear in mind that there are some Egyptian Arabic words that had a b before it, but it's still obvious that it's a word that I already knew. So maybe that number should be less by a factor. It doesn't really matter to me. It's like, I often refer to it, to the statistics as like in the greyhound races, they have a mechanical rabbit. If you've ever seen greyhound, like dog races, they had them in Macau. And so there's a mechanical rabbit that charges down the side of the track, and all the dogs go chasing after the mechanical rabbit. So these statistics are kind of like that mechanical rabbit. They're not, you don't necessarily want to, brag to people that you know this many words, because depending on the language, you may have very many different forms of the same word. So that'll inflate your known words statistic. So it's just an indicator. So I want to have 100 known words a day, or let's say between 500 to 700 known words a week. So this past week, I have 660 known words that I have added to my known words total. I'm happy. The links created, these are the two that I pay the most attention to, but mostly known words, because if I look here at, say, all time, did I hit no? Wait a second. All time. So I have 52,000 saved links, but I have only 15,000 known words. So I have saved over 50,000 words and phrases, but I only know, about 30% of them. So if I want, and my goal is to get to where I understand the podcast better. Like right now, if I get these podcast MP3 files and I listen to it, I understand 15, 20%. I catch words here and there. If there are a lot of words strung together, then I understand that little bit of meaning. But if they're words that I understand are, in between a whole bunch of words that I don't understand, then I don't really get the meaning. So I can't just grab the podcast and run. But I'd like to get to the point where in the morning, as I come up and make breakfast and I just go to the podcast site, I grab a podcast. It's new, because new is good. Fresh is good. It's today's news. It's more fun to do something new than to go over a lesson that you've gone over 5 times and you still don't remember all the words. But after a while, it's just the brain wants novelty. So I want to get to the point where I can just grab a podcast on the fly in my car or while working around the house and understand it. So I have to increase my known words total. So my goal here is to get to I'd like to get to 20,000 known words. So that's the main thing that I target. So if I look at my today, all right, today I haven't done much. Even if I look at yesterday, I had a bit of a weekend where I played golf and did a bunch of other stuff. And so I didn't do much. So today I'm kind of motivated to make sure I hit that 100, adding 100 known words. And the links will come by themselves. So if I go back to my Happy Scribe here, so this is the one I received from my Moroccan collaborator. I received September 28th, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So I just put them into this course, Happy Scribe, and I just number them on the date that she sends them to me, just so that I can tell them apart. And you'll see that I'm running about 15, 18, 14% new words in these podcasts. So there was a time not so long ago when these were running 30, 40% unknown words. So even though I'm struggling to understand them, and I'm not necessarily aware of a big improvement, I do feel sometimes that I have turned a corner, and then the next time I get another, podcast, I don't understand it very well. And so this can be a little frustrating, but I know from these statistics that I'm running 15%. So I'm a lot better than I was. And each one of these, if you'll see again, it has like 100 in the first one, September the 28th. The first one has 194 blue words. Now, some of those will be place names, which I won't count. But if I go through that whole lesson, I will add 100 links or more. But there are also 416 yellow words in there. And those are the ones that I really want to get after, because I want to move them to known wherever I can. So one of the techniques that I use, so we'll get into the lesson here. All right, so here, and of course, here we are looking at the first page. Now, I've been through some of this. That's why so much of it is yellow. So I can tell just by looking at this page that I've done the first 3 paragraphs, By the way, Shelby, is this good? Can you comment? Is this making sense? Because I'm just talking and I don't know how this is being received.
Oh yeah, yeah, we can
Yeah,
see
okay.
everything clearly, and you're making
all
sense.
right, super. So typically what I do now is I know that I'm here in this fourth paragraph, which I've started into. And what I then do is I will go into the sentence view, because I prefer to review these in sentence view. Sentence view has the big advantage in that there's an automatically generated translation, which may not be always totally, correct or accurate or make sense, but it gives you a bit of a hint. And so then I would work my way through these. And so now I, go to the next page. I like to start to wherever there's a blue word. So I see this, I go through it, and I go through and guest. See, I know that's a guest. So I may be tempted here to say, I know that word. One of the troubles, of course, in Arabic is trying to read it. And particularly now that I'm under more pressure as I'm making a presentation. But however that's pronounced, daifa, daufa, I get confused sometimes. What do they say? Okay, can't hear it. Anyway, let's say I know that. I move it to 3. And I'm going to show you why I do that. I like to move my words to 3 so that, because any word that's in status 3, which, means that I'm close to knowing it. And so wherever I can, I move my words, This is, musader is a source. I know that. Sources, musader, sources, musader. So that's a 2. I can move that to a 3. I'm almost to the point where I know that. So musader an ashtabakat, I don't know what that is. Clashes. All right, I don't know. That stays a 1. Okay. Forces. Happened. Wakat. Happened. Okay, I don't know that. Leave it as a 2. Fi damiyat. Is that to support? I don't know. Oh, that's a place. Okay, if it's a place, then I have to make this a. So I just go X. I don't want this word. Damiyat. All right, here. So I don't want it because I don't claim credit for place names. So I won't go through the rest of it, but what I wanted to show you then, if I quit this and I go to my vocabulary section, so I have all my words now that I have saved, and I have different ways of sorting them. So I can go and say, I only want to look at what are known as familiar words, category 3 words, because those are the words that I'm most likely to get close to moving to know. I could add as a filter tags if I only wanted to look at verbs, for example, or if I want them all to come from a particular course, and I can sort them by creation date, by importance, by status, whatever. But I'm going to just go after all the words that are in category 3. And let me know, Shelby, if this doesn't make sense. So then I hit apply. So now I have all my category 3 words. So these are words that I have a high probability, like if there are, I don't know what it is, 20 per page, probably I'm going to be able to pick off 5, 10 of these that I can move to know. So when I want to batch, I want to make sure that I hit my targets, because it's very satisfying to know that you've hit the target. If the goal is I want to listen a lot, that's not as good as I have to listen an hour, or I have to add 100 words to my known words total, or I have to create 100 links. So if it's 4 in the afternoon and I see that I have only added 60, then I'll go back in there and do it again. It's a bit, again, like the mechanical rabbit. It's something that just forces you want to chase that target. You want to make sure you hit that target, and that then a lot of good things happen. So again, I'm not going to go through these, but I know from experience. And one thing you can also do is if you press on this, you get a little counter. So what happens is, like if I go through 10 pages here, and I managed to find, 100 words that I can move to known. And bear in mind that I can move them to known and move them back again, and the statistics adjust. So I give myself the benefit of the doubt. So I say, yeah, I know this. Later on, I feel not quite so comfortable. I move it back. So we can always move back and forth from known to 3 to 2 sometimes. Sometimes I got a little, ambitious and gave myself credit for a word that actually I really don't know. So I move it back to 2. But by and large, 95% of the time, once I've moved it to known, it stays there. And so if I've done 10 or 15 pages, I remember that I got to page 15. So when I go back there, rather than starting from page 1 again, because in all there's like 50 pages, I'll start at page 15. So I just go apply. All right. And so now I'm at page 15. So this is just one. I just wanted to share this as a strategy. In other words, when you're reading, move the status along. Like I know the status moves along by, say, doing flashcards. I don't do a lot of flashcards, so I move them manually. Certainly they move from blue to yellow. That is status 1, but I move it to status 2, which isn't a great big step. But even the fact that you are taking the time to move it to status 2 is you're focusing on it a little bit, it helps. Then you move it to status 3, and then you get to review it again in the vocab section, or you come across it in the text and you move it to known. And in this way, I am hoping that I'm going to be able to get my known words total up to about 20,000. And ultimately the test will be, do I understand my podcast better? Now, one last thing, let's get back to my lessons. One last thing I should say is that in addition to this, where are we here? My lessons. I have also started speaking. So I have now got these conversation reports, and I've started speaking quite a lot because I feel I'm at the stage now where I want to start speaking more. And maybe the end of the month here, I may have, say if I can get I have a tutor in Egypt, Mohammed, who's a great guy, sends excellent reports full of all the errors that I made. Let's just look at and he's just a great guy, and I enjoy talking to him. And he sends very thorough reports with all the mistakes and phrases that I struggled with. And so I am starting to talk more. It helps me, of course, improve my speaking ability. It also makes me realize where I have trouble. For example, the verbs, which reminds me that, let's see. So let's see if I can pick up verb dictionaries. This, if it covers it. Let's have a look here. There we go. So I am using the Reversal Conjugation Dictionary, which exists in a number of languages. I used it for Greek, certainly, French, Italian, Spanish. And so anytime you're on a verb, you can then look at all of the various conjugations of that verb, and it'll even highlight the particular form that you're dealing with. And I know this is all, not many people are doing Arabic, but the same works for a lot of languages where the reverso conjugator exists. And verbs in many languages are so difficult that just to have a chance to kind of go over it, without trying to remember it. And when you see a verb, which which form of the verb is this, and then you review the whole table of conjugations. I find that helpful in trying to master, I shouldn't say master, but get a better handle on this stuff. Now I got to figure out how I get to unsharing. Shelby, can you help me? I've forgotten how to.
Yeah. So there should be like a stop broadcast or end. I think it was end broadcast on your side.
End broadcast. Yeah. Oh, maybe I go to Zoom. Here we are. Yeah. Stop share. Okay.
Awesome.
Screen start video. Wait a second. Oh, so live broadcast has stopped. Okay. And stop it. Okay. Did that work?
Yeah. Yeah,
All
thanks
right.
for the presentation, Steve. I mean, and for those of you who joined us a little bit late, Steve is sharing how he is using Link. And he mentioned in the beginning, he's been using the Link 5.0 beta. So we were showing you guys on Link 4.0, which is something that he hasn't been using so much lately. But he's using his iPad, first of all. So he really loves using it on the iPad. I'm now thinking that I need to invest in an iPad because Link works so great on it. And he's sharing, I saw we got a question in German here. Claudia,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you understand English, but I don't speak German. So to answer the question, Steve is learning Arabic now. So that's why this presentation is about his Arabic learning.
Right. If I could interrupt, Shelby, I mean, I could have chosen Spanish or French or anything else, which more people are familiar with, but it wouldn't be realistic because that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing right now is learning Arabic, but the principle applies to all languages.
Exactly. So thanks, Steve. I think that was really informational or informative. And I was going to say, oh, when he was showing the vocabulary section too, of course, you can always click that orange, yellow review button and do the flashcards. But as Steve said, he prefers to just do it in a list. And you can do it that way too. So Link is extremely customizable. That's one of the reasons that we do these sessions, so that you get a chance to see how other people are using Link. So let's get into some questions. We had a great question submitted by user Timothy last week on the Zoom call, and I thought this might be very relevant for you, Steve. He asked if anyone knows of some good places to import Arabic stories for beginner level. Is that something you would recommend?
All right. So first of all, we have our mini stories at Link. That's what I use because typically with stories, with sort of random stories, beginner stories, theoretically they're easy and sometimes they're children's stories, but I find there's often not a lot of repetition of the vocabulary. They don't necessarily focus on high frequency verbs. Sometimes they introduce, because they're children's stories, you know, fox and wolf and bear, you know, animals and stuff like that, which is not necessarily vocabulary that's easy to learn or that we're that interested in. However, there is a person, Matthew Aldrich, and it's called Lingualism. Lingua and then lingualism. You can Google for it. He also has some of his stories available at Link. And those are, he's got a series called Modo or something. In other words, stories intended for beginners. And so you can certainly look for them. There's a fair amount of, other than the mini stories, and of course, Who Is She, which is also available in Arabic. And again, both of them, the audio quality is excellent. But there are other beginner materials available at Link. So that would be my suggestion. Check out Lingualism. Anytime you Google, Arabic stories, you'll find a whole bunch of, I spent a lot of time doing this, trying to find material to supplement what we had at Link. But in the end, I just ended up using what we had at Link and then graduated from that to the podcasts.
Awesome, thanks. And I shared the link to Lingualism in the Zoom.
Okay.
So we always get questions about how to improve pronunciation. Steve, you just shared that you've been speaking with your tutor. So can you share, first of all, how long were you reading Arabic for before you began to speak? And now that you are speaking, how frequently do you speak?
Well, it used to be that I would wait a long time. I would wait till I had 15,000 words, say in Czech or Russian. With the mini stories, I start earlier. And if there's some other, reason, there has to be a reason to start speaking. So when I said I'm going to learn 3 languages, Persian, Arabic, and Turkish, then I kind of committed to doing a sort of an exit video after 3 months. So of course, I don't want to look completely stupid. So I started speaking, ahead of that exit video. My impression on the pronunciation is you have to hear a lot of the language before you can speak. You have to hear what you're going to pronounce. And very often we don't hear it at first. It takes quite a while before we start to hear clearly how the language is pronounced. Some people think that if you start speaking too early, you might sort of ingrain some, because you haven't quite heard it correctly, and you start then pronouncing what you hear, and then you might not pronounce correctly, and you may not be able to correct that pronunciation. I have no proof that that's the case. I even doubt that that's the case. Some people say that, but I don't see any particular advantage in trying to speak too early. I find the many stories, because there's so much repetition, is very helpful in terms of getting a bit of a rhythm in the language. Other than that, in order to improve your pronunciation, many people have pointed out that the intonation, the rhythm of the language is often as important as the individual sounds. So if you get the rhythm, the example of French, because in English we have a lot of sort of up and down when we speak the language, and of course the French they speak, it's more monotonous. And if you're speaking French with a typical je veux parler le français, then you get too much of this English intonation into your French. And if you try and imitate the intonation of the language, it helps you with your pronunciation. I also think it's very useful to, use sentence view on link. And of course, any of the link content, for example, the mini stories or who is she, is timestamped by us, because we can control it. It's our material. So we timestamp it so you can hear the natural voice saying the sentence. And so a sentence is a chunk of text it's relatively easy to listen to and then repeat with the intonation that you just heard. Even if you mispronounce a word or two, focus totally on the intonation. If you graduate, so those are the kinds of things. And if you graduate beyond that, you might go paragraph at a time, listening to the natural speech and then trying to imitate that. So I would put a major emphasis on intonation, and I wouldn't worry unduly about the sort of the difficult sounds, that sort of the trilled R in Spanish or the guttural R in French, trying to nail those down. Every language has a few sounds, like in Arabic, there's this so I haven't got it, there's no way I can do it properly. I wouldn't worry overly about the sort of small number of sounds that cause difficulty, and focus rather on the intonation and using sentence mode, particularly with, say, who is she or the mini stories, and listening to the natural speech one sentence at a time and trying to capture that intonation. I think that can help.
Great, Steve. Thank you so much. So we are now getting into some questions that were submitted during the call, and they're continuing to come in. So thanks, guys. Keep asking questions if they come up. So Heitor from Brazil asked about how do I learn languages with link, since certain languages do not have the text-to-speech function? Oh, and he wants you to answer in Portuguese. I think we're going to keep the answers in English for the sake of today's call, but
okay.
We can always, we can follow up with an email as well, Heitor, if you need that to be in Portuguese.
First of all, I did an interview with a Brazilian in Portuguese, so that should be put up on my channel shortly. And we should maybe have a session with our Brazilian friends purely in Portuguese, where they can ask all the questions they want in Portuguese, and it'll all be in Portuguese for Portuguese speakers. So that's an event that we should plan for, because we've had one in Russian, for example, and I think we should have one in Portuguese. There is an issue with languages for which there is no text-to-speech. I experienced that problem with Persian, Farsi. They don't have text-to-speech. It's a lot more difficult. I wish they had text-to-speech. We've tried. We can't get, because with these text-to-speech things, we go to providers. This is not our software, and we have to go with the best service that covers the largest possible number of languages. And for whatever reason, Farsi or Persian isn't there. So what do? I just use that 5-second repeat button. So I'll study sentence mode, and I'll just go 5-second repeat, 5-second repeat. And so, and I'll tell you, it's very difficult in Persian because the Arabic script, it's not always obvious how the word is pronounced. So, whereas if you're reading in Portuguese, you can tell how it's pronounced, even if you don't know the meaning of the word, because the spelling is so consistent. Whereas in Persian and in Arabic, that's not the case. So it is a problem. I wish we had text to speech. Use the 5-second repeat button. And I gather that I shouldn't talk too much about 5.0, but one of the things they're planning to do is to make it possible for people to more easily timestamp things. So if I'm listening to something in Persian, then I can timestamp the thing so that I get the audio for that sentence. So when we have that capability, it'll make it a lot easier. But that's about the best I can do.
Yeah, and I would add that the text to speech is great, but it doesn't sound like a natural person speaking in most cases. So it's important to not be reliant on that. And, you know, it's a good idea to actually listen to the way native speakers talk in the lesson audios.
But I would just add, Shelby, that in those languages where the writing system is not consistent, such as English, for example, you know, though, through, whatever, you know, I mean, it can be pronounced in any number of ways very often. You need the text to speech to know how to pronounce the word. So that text to speech is very important, actually, to grab the pronunciation of a word or a phrase in those languages where the writing system is not consistent. In Spanish, obviously, that's not an issue because you can pronounce anything you read once you understand, you know, the value of the letters in Spanish.
Right. And I was just saying, like the audio of the native speaker actually speaking, like on a podcast,
Right.
You can't compete with that. Because
I can't possibly listen to the whole thing in text to speech. I agree with you. That's just not very pleasant. Yeah.
So, this is another question that comes up. Nicholas asked today if it's ill-advised to try and learn 2 or more languages at the same time. Perhaps the brain can handle that, no problem, or is it better to focus on a single language objective? I mean, Steve, I know you've been learning 3 languages at once, but you've been focusing more on Arabic, it seems. So can you talk a little bit about that experience?
So, I mean, it depends on your goals. Obviously, if your goal is to learn one language, then the more time you spend on that one language, the faster you're going to progress. So then I was kind of faced with this issue. I would like to learn 3 Middle Eastern languages: Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. So if I were to spend, say, 3 years on Arabic, then I would be nowhere in my Persian or Turkish at the end of 3 years. So then I said, well, I'll try learning the 3 at the same time. That was a bit too much, but at least I have a sense of each of those languages now, which I enjoy. I know how those languages work to some extent. I have some words. So I'm glad I did that. But then I decided, so in other words, what I'm saying is it entirely depends on your goals. And then I said to myself, well, Turkish, while it's a difficult language and it's different, it's written in the Latin alphabet, so it's easier. So I can go back to that later. So let's put that aside. So I parked my Turkish, but I can go back to what I did and it's not lost. But I want to get better at reading the Arabic script, which is used in Persian and Arabic. So I focus on those 2 languages. Then came this 90-day challenge. And I said, okay, well, let's totally focus on Arabic for these 90 days. Definitely, I am progressing more quickly in my Arabic now than I was when I was sharing my time between Arabic and Persian. The good thing about doing 2 languages is that any learning activity, or you're focused on one activity, there is an element of fatigue because you're doing the same thing. So to that extent, if say after 2 or 3 days of Arabic, I was tired of my Arabic, I'd go to my Persian and it was fun again. And I kind of rediscovered it again. And so that it can be quite stimulating and you know, more fun. But it means that in a given week, you know, going back to my statistics, I'll have, instead of having 500 or 600 new known words in Arabic, it'll only be 300. So it really depends on what you want to do. It's not impossible to do. Certainly, there are many places in the world where school kids learn more than one language. And I don't think they do any worse than, say, English-speaking Canadian kids who spend 10 years on French and don't learn anything. So they don't do any worse doing 2 languages. They probably do better. I suspect that the student in Germany who does French and and Italian probably learns better than the student in Canada who isn't very motivated and doesn't learn any French. So it all depends on your motivation too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said in the beginning is the crux of the answer, which is that it does depend on your goals. But the short answer is yes, you can learn multiple languages at once.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to probably be a little bit slower to get to the more advanced or fluent. You certainly will be slower. I mean, but the languages, you can confuse them. Yes, they can also help each other though too. And I think to your last point, Steve, language learning is it's a form of learning in the brain. So the better you get at learning languages, I think the better you get at learning languages. Like so each language, yes, they can get confused sometimes, but that's just a minor low impact problem. You're not going to get stuck on that confusion forever. You're going to figure it out pretty quickly, actually. So that's low impact, and overall language learning, I think, is a great skill to develop. And I think Steve is a living proof that it's great for your brain.
Yeah, and I compare it sometimes to sports. Like they've often said, like if kids only play one sport, like sometimes say here in Canada, there's an over concentration on hockey. Actually, if the kids also go and play tennis and play soccer and play other sports, it makes them better in the hockey. So I think there's a bit of that in languages too, that for the brain to get a little more flexible and study other languages, it's also, it has its positive side. And the interference thing is not a big deal. Not a big deal. I agree with you. Low impact, not a big problem.
Great analogy. I love that. So we got some more questions coming in here. Oscar says, hi, Steve. I'm learning Japanese from A1 level. I find your Japanese videos helpful and enjoyable. I have a question about comprehensible input versus compelling input. Mm-hmm. Is it good to listen to more advanced, compelling content where I understand about 15 to 20%? He says he enjoys listening to them, even if he doesn't understand much at this moment. Or is it better to listen to more beginner level content to acquire words gradually and easier?
Again, I think I'm in the same position. So that 15% is about where I am on my Al Jazeera podcast. I think, it's important to vary things, and it's important to do what you feel like doing. So there's no question that it is often very pleasant to listen to material that's relatively easy. I do re-listen to my mini stories, particularly if I want something that's not too demanding. I'm doing the dishes or I'm working or whatever. So this thing's just going on in the background. I notice some things, I fade out, I get back in again. So that's, can be fun. But then after about 2 or 3 mini stories, I'm bored. So then I go and grab something that's actually interesting. So this first podcast from Al Jazeera was about, unrest in Egypt and so forth. The subject matter is itself interesting. So I think that the answer is you want to vary it and be guided by what you feel like doing, and don't feel that you should be obligated to do the one or the other. And whatever you are doing, while you're doing it, stay with it. Like don't, it's very easy to sort of be in a difficult thing. Oh, this is too difficult. Go back to mini stories. Oh, this is boring. Go back to the difficult stuff. So you're constantly flipping back and forth. I mean, you got to give it a chance. Like stay with the one or the other. Stay with it for a certain period of time, and then you can move back to whatever, to the more difficult. And so, and obviously, there's comprehensible input. We got to be careful. Like if you start in a language, nothing is comprehensible. So you have to struggle at first. And even when you're going to compelling content, some of it may also not be very comprehensible. So it's a constant balance. I think each person should kind of plot that for themselves.
Yeah. And one thing that I come back to is one of your 7 secrets for success with language learning. And you said to do what you like to do. And with Link, this is the first time that I have really loved language learning, because it's hard to learn languages. But if you have the opportunity to study content that you love, even if it's way above your skill level, I would say, Oscar, like, do what you like to do best. And I also think it's important to challenge yourself. You know, you shouldn't necessarily be 100% comfortable in the lessons that you study. And like Steve said too, have some variety, you know, maybe go back and forth and do the challenging stuff for the bulk of it. And then go, you know, hit the weights in the gym with your mini stories. And you're going to be like, wow, I'm pretty good at these mini stories right now after studying more advanced content.
Totally agreed.
Awesome. So we're getting a lot more questions streaming in. Here's a more simple one. And Steve, I don't know if you commented on this when you were showing the vocabulary review. How long do you spend reviewing vocabulary per day?
Again, I wish we had, some system on Link that would measure the amount of time you spend on different activities. I'm curious. I don't know. And you can often think that, you can totally, be wildly off. I tend to underestimate the amount of time I spend. I probably spend more time than I think. But there's not a time thing there. I say, I need my 100 new word, I need to add 100 known words to my total. So I'll bang, 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 bang. Okay, how many have I got? I'll go and check my statistics. Oh, I only added 50. I'll do another 20. Now I'm tired of doing it. I'll go back to reading something or whatever. So I'm not guided by time, but I would say that probably, so people ask me, how much time do you spend? Oh, I spend an hour listening and then I spend a half hour reading. That's not true. In fact, I spend more time than that. So have that hour of listening. That's easy because, it's 20 minutes making breakfast, 15, 20 minutes cleaning up. I work out, I'm in the car. So that's an hour. That's easy. But I spend more time than that because I'll typically, in the evening after dinner or maybe in the afternoon or sometimes in the morning, I'll work a bit on the iPad. And once I get in there and I'm moving words to known, that ends up being half an hour, 45 minutes. And now I'm speaking to my tutor for an hour every second day or every day. So I'm actually spending 3 hours a day now, not my 1.5. So I tend to underestimate the amount of time I spend. But on the vocabulary section, again, I am driven by the sort of target of getting 100 new known words. So once I've achieved that, I don't go back there. Once I got my 100, I don't want to do any more because then I want to get credit for those the next day. So I leave them now. I go back to them later on.
Sure. And you also, we have to watch out for fatigue too. If you spend hours and hours on end drilling vocabulary, I would probably get bored and tired from doing that for too long. So as someone who recently started practicing French, I mean, Steve, you've been doing, how long have you been learning Arabic?
Oh, it's 2 years. Like you mix in the Turkish and the Farsi and the odd trip that I took with my wife. And so it's not like every day, but I've been at it for 2 years.
Right.
And that's what it takes. Like I have no illusions. That's what it takes. It takes, even if I had been on Arabic full time, I'd be further ahead. But we're talking, it's a complicated language. It's not like going, like with you and knowing Spanish, your French is not going to take you that long. But It takes time.
Yeah. And so where I'm at, since I'm a few months into learning French, I'm doing about an hour of lessons a day of reading. And I spend more time listening when I'm out and about, or not really out and about these days, but when I'm here sitting at my desk working. So that adds up to, I don't know how many hours of listening, but I probably spend maximum 15 minutes a day doing vocabulary review at my stage where I'm at. Maybe I could stand to do a little bit more.
One thing about vocabulary review, everyone approaches it differently. For me, I find doing flashcards very tedious. Like I can't do it for more than 5 minutes. So I don't do it. I sometimes do it, maybe turning the page in a lesson. I might review newly learned words like that I've just looked up. So for me, I go down the list. It's just exposure. And all I do is say, do I know that? No, I don't know this. I don't know this. I don't. Yeah, I know this one. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. Yeah, I know this one. I don't know. I don't know. So that's the process. It's not racking my brain to try and remember anything. It's either I know it or I don't know it. So it's just exposure.
Great. So we have a really interesting question in here. Brahim asked, when you learn a new language, do you think in your mother tongue to speak, or do you have another way?
This is a very common question. I think that when we start a new language, of course, we think in our mother tongue. because there's this gradual process where everything comes from our mother tongue. That's the only point of reference we have. All these words are new. So we're converting them to our native language, or a language that we know very, very well, right? And then gradually some words, they start to have meaning, without reference to your native language. And pretty soon some bits of text start to have meaning in and of themselves without reference to your native language. But this is a very gradual process. So only in the languages that I speak the best am I totally free from my native language. I'm just speaking in that language, reacting to that language. But in languages that I don't speak so well, I'm kind of thinking it out in my native language or a language that I know, and then saying it a lot of the time, not all the time. And then as I speak that language more, as I read and listen more in that language, then the amount of time that I'm in my native language becomes less and less. But it's a gradual process. But at the beginning, absolutely, you're relying on your native language. That's all you got.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is the long-term goal. Once you can really start speaking and understanding in your target language, that's when you're really internalizing it. So let's see here. We've got more questions streaming in, a lot of that are kind of repeated that we've gone over a couple times. Hamid, sorry if I got that pronunciation wrong, asked, is it possible for an Arabic speaker to develop an American accent and sound like a native American speaker?
Well, in theory, anybody can learn any accent. And, we typically tend to think of, say, Chinese people as having trouble developing a native sounding American accent, let's say. But yet I know immigrants here in Canada who haven't been here that long and who speak very, very well, and others who don't. So it's very individual. I think it depends on how much listening you do. It depends also on an attitude. Those people who seem to speak the most naturally in another language, including the pronunciation, they're people who have a lot of friends in the local, say if you're living in the States, say, and you have a lot of friends and you're with them a lot and you want to kind of be in with that group. And so you start to identify with that group and you start to imitate how they speak and so forth. So I think there's so many factors that influence it. By the same token, I would say that the number of people who are like totally to be mistaken for a native is very, very small. If I look at some of the truly outstanding polyglots that you can find on the internet, like Luca Lamporiello, who speaks flawless English, flawless everything, and his English is flawless. It's very close to native, but it's not native. So you can get very close, and obviously the native is the model you want to imitate. But you don't have to speak, you don't have to be mistaken for a native. And I think sometimes that's a goal that people set for themselves. It's far more important to use the language well. I know people here who, that I encounter in work or whatever, and they just speak so well. They speak better than native speakers. Their choice of words, their vocabulary, how they express themselves, everything is very, elegant and accurate and so forth, and yet they have an accent, and it doesn't matter. And it's far better to use the language well with an accent as opposed to, hi, how you doing, trying to pretend you're an American, and yet you can't speak very well. So put the emphasis on using words well, and that the accent will come.
I couldn't agree more. I studied Spanish for all of high school, and then I stopped practicing for several years, and then I moved to Ecuador. And in Ecuador, they speak really nice Spanish. It sounds a lot like Mexican Spanish, in my opinion. And I thought I was doing well there. But when I moved to Chile, which is a completely different dialect, I could not understand anyone, and they could not understand me. So I had a lovely friend a local friend who was very honest with me. And she said, you have to work on your accent, in that you have to work on your pronunciation of the words. So I started focusing on that. And as I immersed myself more and more with the Chileans, I started developing their dialect. And over time, they started to kind of laugh and say, oh, you kind of speak with a Chilean accent. But of course, I wasn't necessarily fooling anyone that was Chilean that thought I was from there. But I agree with you, Steve. It's the goal. You wanna use that as the guide and aim for that. But unless you really need to fool someone, it's not necessary.
You're a spy, you know.
But just look at the movie stars. Sometimes they do a great job developing a new accent.
Yeah, but that's their business. Okay.
Right.
An actor, he or she, and that's a good point, because they're able to project themselves into another role. They have to be that role. So if you want to speak like an American, you have to almost project yourself. I am an American. So you have to play that role. And that's why the actors are so good at it.
Yeah. And I would say if you really want to develop that, you should watch a lot of TV too, in that dialect of the language that you're going for. And even songs, like just ways to pick up on slang and the way that people are actually using the language, if that's your goal. Interesting question here. We only have a couple more minutes, so we'll get a couple quick ones out of the way. Do you ever get tired, or have you ever gotten tired of studying a particular language to the point of even resenting it?
The biggest frustration in a language is the sort of inability to find content that is both interesting and accessible. So that was a problem for me with Korean. And I did find these podcasts that were good. And at that time, the Happy Transcriber, the automatic transcription service wasn't available. So I was paying someone to transcribe them. It was very difficult. I was spending all this money, and I kind of lost interest to some extent. I think now, if I were to go back to Korean, then I would use this automatic transcription, and I would go for things of interest. We also have the ability now to go to YouTube and bring content in with subtitles. So there's a whole range of content out there now that would be accessible to me. But where I become a little frustrated is when I'm kind of tired of doing the sort of beginner stuff. Oh, and we didn't have mini stories in Korean either. So we had the sort of very childish and boring beginner material that's just, you know, in Korean, there's just so much of it. And there's not a lot of intermediate or accessible intermediate or slightly difficult content. So that was frustrating to me. That's the only time. I have no sense of frustration with what I'm doing in Arabic and Farsi now. I'm just discovering more and more about that part of the world, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and remember, the idea with Link is to practice what you enjoy.
Exactly.
So we'll take 2 more questions. We have one from a user who is doubting the effectiveness of listening while doing other tasks, cooking, driving, cleaning, etc. I know that that's a huge, that's a huge source of your practice, or it has been in the past, Steve, and maybe it varies based on where you're at in learning a certain language. But this user is saying that he doesn't understand the effectiveness of it if you're really new in a language. Like if you're a total beginner, you're listening to a podcast or whatever, and you can only understand maybe 10 to 15%. Is that actually time where you're learning? Or do you need to be more at 40 to 60% before you start listening like that when you're doing other tasks?
So if I take the example of Persian, Arabic, and Turkish, when I started in those languages, or Greek for that matter, I was at 0 comprehension, 0. And if I review my statistics on my playlist, I have listened to the various mini stories 30, 40, 50 times. And when I remember when I started listening to Persian or Arabic, it was just noise. I didn't understand a thing. And I would listen, then I would go and read it, look up words, listen again, look up words, and slowly, like this great big jigsaw puzzle, a few pieces start to become clearer. And the net result was that at the end of 2-3 months, I understood the first 10, 15, 20 stories quite well. The next 10, 15, 20, not quite as well, and struggled with the last 20 stories. So and the bulk of my study time was listening while doing other tasks. So if I listened to the stories 30 times, I maybe reread them 5 times. So that overwhelmingly my study time was listening. And it wasn't, I never, ever just sit down and listen. because when I do that, my mind wanders. I just don't have the ability to sit there and just do nothing and sit in my chair and listen. So it was all listening while doing other tasks. So the result was that at the end of 3 months, well, the result was you can see my exit videos in Persian. The Arabic is not fair because I had been doing it before that. But if you look at the Persian and Turkish exit videos, that is essentially 3 months of listening to mini stories. Oh, mostly, like the odd bit of more interesting content, but overwhelmingly listening 10, 20, 30, 40 times to mini stories. And then I was able to communicate. And that is essentially listening while doing other tasks. So for me, it works. That's all I can say.
Yeah, everyone is different, and we highly encourage you to experiment. And one other tip that Steve gives in his 7 video secrets to success is to learn to notice. You know, even if you're only understanding 10, 15%, try to notice any word that you might understand. And as you hear it in various contexts, it starts to have more meaning to you and it's embedded more deeply in you. So I also believe that at the early stage that I'm at in my French, for example, I will listen to songs that go fast, that, you know, use tons of words that I don't know in French. And I still try to notice. And I think it's helping me, but stay tuned.
One thing I would add, like, okay, French in a way for an English speaker, and especially someone who knows Spanish, is a little easier because words are recognizable. Not necessarily at first, but pretty soon you see where they're similar to words that you know. Mm-hmm. In Arabic, that's not the case. Like, there's nothing. And so what starts to happen is you talk about noticing. What you start to notice is you start to hear words. You don't know what the word means, but you now hear that this is a word and this is a word. So you start to sort of tell where one word ends and the next word begins. That's the first step in noticing. So that's an early stage in noticing, right, which is very important. And
like developing your ear for the language.
Exactly. You're developing, you see that there's sort of the divisions between words. Now you got to look those words up, and then you don't remember what you looked up, and then you look it up again and you don't remember, and all of this is happening, but at least you're able to identify the sort of individual words in what you're listening to. The second thing about noticing that's very important is I can go back to, a mini story in Arabic that I've listened to 40 times. And I've been off listening to Al Jazeera. And I go back to that mini story and I will notice things, aspects of grammar, structure, word use and stuff that maybe I've come across it elsewhere. And all of a sudden I notice it in the mini story, whereas I hadn't noticed it before. It's amazing the amount of stuff that goes by you that you don't notice. But at a certain point, you start to notice. And that's why the ability to notice is also dependent on lots of input. Because after a while, you just notice more and more things. And there's tons of stuff to notice. Anyway.
So we have a lot more questions. Most of them we've answered in some format or another earlier in the call. So you guys can, this is recorded and it'll be viewable on Steve's YouTube channel, the link Facebook page. We have one final question. It's a quick one. Ibrahim said, "Hi, Steve. Are you planning to go to an Arabic speaking country after the challenge? I invite you to Egypt."
Okay. I would love to visit an Arabic speaking country. I have been to two actually. I've been to Jordan and I've been to Morocco. Now people say, well, Morocco, they speak a different Arabic, blah, blah, blah. That's true. But I found that taxi drivers, there was a lady who ran a restaurant, and with my, limited standard Arabic, they were definitely very nice about humoring me in standard Arabic. Egypt, my current tutor is from Egypt, a super nice guy. I would love to go. I think Egypt, I'm beginning to develop a bit of a fascination for Egypt because it's the largest Arabic speaking country and it's the center of the film industry. My wife and I have looked at a few Egyptian series on Netflix, and they're kind of nice. They have a bit of an oldie worldy feel to them, not so much sort of violence and stuff. So I'm tempted to go there, but I wanna be at a level in my Arabic that I can really take advantage. And I find that to really take advantage of being in the country where they speak the language, you got to be at a fairly decent level. Otherwise, you end up saying the same thing over and over again. Yes, I'm learning Arabic. Yes, it's nice. Yes, my name is Steve. End of conversation, right? So I want to wait a little bit. But definitely Egypt, not only for all of the reasons surrounding, history and the pyramids and everything that there is in Egypt, taking a cruise down the Nile and whatever there is to do. I'd love to do that. Not only Egypt incidentally, but also other Arabic countries, definitely.
Great. Well, I would also love to visit Egypt one day, but I'm very far off from understanding any word in Arabic. So we've got a long ways to go over here too. But thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate you giving a presentation and answering all these questions. I think it was really
I enjoyed it.
Awesome. So
bye, everyone.
Who are streaming and watching, we are sending out emails every week to link users with invitations to calls like this. So if you're not registered for a link, make sure that you do so. And if you haven't subscribed to Steve's YouTube channel either, go ahead and do that. And we'll be continuing to do something like this every week. Maybe not a live stream next week, but something for you to engage with other link users. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.